This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Uteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Taiwan approves a $25 billion special budget to boost air defenses against threats from China. The package is smaller than what President William Lai sought, but bigger than the opposition's initial proposal. Southeast Asian leaders are pushing for deeper energy cooperation and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The call comes as the Middle East conflict sends energy prices surging across the region. Also, the first oil tanker to clear the Strait of Hormuz since its closure has arrived in South Korea as investigators probe a fire that damaged a Korean-operated ship. Kim Jong-un inspects a new howitzer, reportedly able to hit targets more than 60 kilometers away, putting Seoul within reach. North Korea says it will deploy the artillery near the South Korean border later this year. Now, the world's biggest automaker counts the cost of the Iran war on its operations, setting the figure in the billions of dollars. Also ahead in the bulletin, a key question remains a month after Chinese President Xi Jinping met Taiwan's opposition leader Li-wun. Did the historic handshake change anything at all to tensions across the Taiwan Strait? Plus, electric vehicles are driving the global push for cleaner transport, but the real power may not lie in building cars or mining lithium. It sits in refining the material that powers every battery. We find out why China holds the key. Taiwan's parliament has approved a $25 billion defense spending bill following months of political wrangling, but it falls short of what President William Lai's administration had proposed. The government originally sought nearly $40 billion in extra defense spending, which included funding for U.S. arms, as well as Taiwan-made drones and other weapons. It was intended to bolster the island's military to counter pressure from Beijing forces. But the opposition-controlled parliament passed a scaled-down version of the bill. And for more, CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen, she joins us live from Taipei. Victoria, so now Taiwan has approved this defense budget. What does the final version tell us?
Well, this is really a compromise outcome. The government had pushed for a much bigger plan, about $40 billion over 8 years. But what's passed is a scaled-down version of around $25 billion, backed by the opposition. Now, the focus is narrower, mainly on weapons already offered by the U.S., including the record $11 billion arms deals announced by Trump last year. Now, the approved budget does take into consideration a possible second U.S. arms package, reportedly worth $14 billion. But there's a key condition, and that is the opposition is saying that any spending must match exactly what the U.S. formally announces. So it has to be tied to confirmed arms sales. And that's where the uncertainty comes in. Because a big question now is whether that second package will actually be announced, especially with the Xi-Trump meeting coming up. So for now, the budget gives Taiwan some flexibility, but a lot will still depend on what Washington does next.
And also, Vic, so this approval, what does that tell us about Taiwan's political dynamics right now?
Well, it shows both sides are trying to strike a balance. For the opposition, backing the bill helps them avoid looking weak on defense, especially with elections coming up and public concern over security rising. It's also paving the way for KMT chairwoman Li-wun to visit the U.S. in June. This after the party came under great pressure from Washington to approve the budget. Of course, at the same time, the KMT wants to show that they're being careful with spending. That's why they pushed for a smaller budget and insisted on tying it to actual U.S. arms deals. Now, for the DPP government, they said it is a discount on the integrity of Taiwan's overall defense system and a discount on Taiwan's commitment to demonstrating self-defense to the world. But analysts say even though this isn't the full amount the DPP wanted, getting it passed still matters. It shows Taiwan is moving forward instead of staying stuck in political gridlock. But again, there is an external factor hanging over all of this. Whether the U.S. goes ahead with that second $14 billion package, possibly after the Xi-Trump meeting, remains unclear. And that uncertainty means lawmakers here may still need to adjust or revisit the budget down the line. So there is certainly progress, but not yet the final chapter.
Many thanks for that report. CNA's senior correspondent Victoria Jen, live from Taipei. South Korea has started investigations on board a ship that was damaged near the Strait of Hormuz. The South Korean-operated vessel was towed into Dubai today after it reported a fire on Monday. Now, the Panama-flagged cargo ship suffered an explosion in its engine room area while anchored near the UAE. Investigators are trying to determine the cause of the blast. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump blames Iran for the incident, but Tehran's embassy in Seoul strongly denied any involvement. Seoul says it's keeping all possibilities open and will prioritize fact-finding before deciding on any response. Now, meanwhile, the Malta-flagged tanker Odessa has reached South Korea's west coast after passing through the Strait of Hormuz in April. It's the first crude tanker to complete the route and arrive in South Korea since Iran's blockade. Now, the vessel is said to carry up to 1 million barrels of crude oil, enough to cover nearly half of the country's daily consumption. Now, the U.S. and Iran have exchanged fire along the Strait of Hormuz, threatening their ceasefire and casting a shadow on a potential peace deal. Iran state media says the U.S. and some regional allies struck key civilian facilities. Multiple explosions were reportedly heard in the port city of Bandar Abbas and Kishim Island. Iran's military says it will not hesitate to respond powerfully to any attack. The U.S. Central Command says it carried out retaliatory strikes on Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking American forces, including Navy destroyers crossing the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM did not say which sites it targeted. Tehran, meantime, blames the U.S. for violating their ceasefire after American forces targeted an Iranian-flagged tanker entering the waterway. President Donald Trump confirmed the exchange with an ABC reporter, calling the U.S. strike a love tap. He maintains that the ceasefire is still in effect. Iran is reviewing a U.S. proposal to end the conflict after exchanging messages through mediator Pakistan. The proposal leaves key demands unresolved, including Tehran's nuclear ambitions and control of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. and Bahrain have proposed a resolution before the UN Security Council, pressing Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But it faces a potential veto by China and Russia, which blocked a similar earlier draft. Well, North Korea is reportedly planning to deploy new long-range artillery systems that are capable of reaching Seoul. State media KCNA said that leader Kim Jong-un visited a munitions factory to review production of a new self-propelled gun howitzer. The weapon is said to have a range exceeding 60 kilometers, putting Seoul within striking range. Now, state media reported that Mr. Kim said that it will bring significant changes and advantages to the military's ground operations. KCNA says that Pyongyang is also set to commission its first naval destroyer in the coming weeks. Mr. Kim visited the 5,000-ton destroyer vessel named Cho-hyun, overseeing handling tests ahead of its formal deployment. Reports say the North Korean leader has ordered its delivery to the Navy by mid-June. In recent years, North Korea has expanded its nuclear capabilities, developing strategic weapons amid rising tensions with the South. Coming up on East Asia tonight, the ongoing dispute between Samsung Electronics and workers entering a new phase next week, with mediation about to start. And Sony looking to buy back shares after its stock plummeted more than 20% this year. Hello again. You're watching East Asia tonight, and glad to have your company this Friday evening. Well, For more business updates, let's turn to Olivia Marzuki now. And today we're talking about oil prices. Apparently, it's continuing to raise inflationary pressure across Asia. Olivia, are we seeing any reprieve in sight?
Unfortunately not, Otelli. So crude futures still trading pretty volatile here in Asian trade sessions. And WTI is still trading in negative, but Brent is gaining steam. Actually, WTI is inching flat as we speak now. Brent gaining steam there, about 0.3%. After renewed fighting between the U.S. and Iran threatened the fragile ceasefire and dashed hopes for a peace deal anytime soon. And it also puts the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz in limbo. A little relief for Asia. The region received oil cargo in Mexico 2 days ago, the first in 9 months, with more to follow. The medium-sized crude tanker Suezmax tanker Orion carried 1 million barrels of fuel oil headed to Singapore. Fuel oil traders say strong prices in Asia are pulling cargoes to this side of the world while there is excess supply in the Americas. The upward pressure on fuel prices being felt around Asia. China's raising the price caps for gasoline and diesel a month after it curbed increases to manage the inflationary impact of the war on Iran. From tomorrow, the maximum retail prices for gasoline will rise by around $47 per metric ton. Japanese auto giant Toyota expects fallout from the Iran war to cost the company around $4.3 billion this financial year. It's one of the biggest warnings yet on the impact of the crisis on global corporations. It reported an almost 50% drop in quarterly earnings, even as revenue actually edged up by sales volume nearly 2%. And for the current financial year just started, it expects operating profit to decline 20% from the previous year. Toyota expects hybrid car sales to exceed 5 million vehicles for the first time ever this year. Higher energy prices are pushing some customers toward fuel-efficient cars, but not enough to offset rising costs. The outlook is also weighed down by U.S. tariffs, slowing sales in China, recalls, and intensifying EV competition. Toyota's key suppliers are grappling with higher raw material costs, shortages of aluminiums and resins, and ongoing logistical disruptions. Japan's car makers import about 70% of their aluminium from the Middle East. Let's check on the state of play in Toyota shares today. It ended the session down more than 2% on that tepid forecast. Sony's out with its latest earnings results as a gaming giant released an upbeat forecast of a higher annual operating profit for this financial year. It also announced a $3.2 billion share buyback plan to scoop up to 230 million shares off the market. The electronics and entertainment conglomerate expects an operating profit of around $10.2 billion in its current financial year, with overall profit to rise 11%. It also shared plans to cancel 3% of its shares on May the 29th. The company also forecasts higher profit in its gaming business, but flagged lower revenue due to a dip in hardware sales. The fate of PlayStation 5 this year will depend on the company's ability to secure memory at reasonable prices. And looking at its last March quarter results, revenue came in close to $20 billion, up 12% on year. And net income was around $530 million, down sharply from the year before. And Sony's music and smartphone image sensor businesses made the biggest contributions to growth in the past financial year. Sony shares surged by more than 7% before ending the session in the red. It did see the biggest intraday jump in 2 months. So far this year, the stock has declined more than 20% due to pressure from surging component costs. And Japan's equity benchmark pulled back from yesterday's record high following a string of solid corporate earnings. The Nikkei 225 ending the final day of trading week on the back foot, while the broader Topix slid about 0.3%. The yen managing to stay steady against a greenback at 156.6, ahead of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's visit to Tokyo next week. Yen stability is expected to be part of that agenda. Moving on now to Samsung, it is having a $1 trillion moment backed by demand for AI memory chips. And its workers want their cut, and they're threatening to go on an 18-day strike if their demands are not met. The dispute now entering a mediation process set for next week, Monday and Tuesday. The dispute is over how the AI windfall should be shared. Samsung's union wants bigger performance bonuses, the removal of bonus caps, and reportedly as much as 15% of the chip division's operating profit allocated to workers. The Financial Times says both sides are close to a 13% figure. That's roughly $340,000 per employee. Management wants that as a one-time payout, but the union wants it guaranteed every year. Workers are also comparing their deal with rival SK hynix, where AI-linked bonuses are far larger and long-term. Samsung and SK hynix together make about 2/3 of the world's memory chips. A walkout could disrupt production, damage customer trust, and put more pressure on the global AI supply chain. Union officials say a one-day walkout in April caused a 58% drop in production during a single shift. They are threatening to do it for 18 days this time, from May the 21st, if the outcome of the mediation next week is not satisfactory. While East Asian markets are riding the AI trade with South Korea and Taiwan both nearing record highs, the TAIEX in Taipei ended the session down, but staying not too far from its peak territory. And in Seoul, the benchmark Kospi scaled another all-time high, capping its biggest week and its best week in 8 years. It's seen more than 13% return since Monday, extending its winning streak to a 5th straight week now. But that rally was narrow, with more shares falling than rising. Memory chip giant SK hynix lending support to the wider index, finishing nearly 2% firmer, while Samsung Electronics slipped by more than 1%. East Asia's tech hype is driving markets higher, and in the case of South Korea, the rally is driven by memory chips powering AI. So the big question is, how sustainable is this rally? For more, we're joined by Sam Conrad, Asian Equity Income Investment Manager at Jupiter Asset Management. Sam, thank you so much for your time today. Let's get straight to Samsung and SK hynix. They have been the obvious market movers in South Korea. Does that make the Kospi stronger because it has clear global chip champions, or in fact more fragile because so much depends on just those two names?
We think it makes the Kospi stronger, and that's because the big surge you've seen in the share prices of both Samsung and Hynix have been driven by their earnings. And we expect their earnings to stay strong for the rest of 2026. We actually think they could be even stronger in 2027, and we think that is likely to continue for several years. So we do think that the big supply-demand imbalance that you're currently seeing in the global memory market is likely to continue for longer than many people expect. And that's likely to be very positive for the earnings and therefore the share prices of both Samsung and Hynix. And that will be very supportive for the Kospi.
All right. So you're seeing support levels for Kospi. We've heard of the so-called Korea discount, where listed companies are valued more cheaply because of concerns around governance and shareholder returns. The government, as we know, wants to change that with the Value Up program. Now, do you see that reform actually moving the needle at all?
It's definitely a positive. I think it's not supporting the market as much as the earnings growth we're seeing from the technology companies. But if you're seeing companies increase their dividend payout ratios, cancelling treasury shares, then that will support a higher multiple for individual companies and the market as a whole. What's very unusual is that you've seen this really strong rally for the Kospi year to date, but the valuations for the market is still extremely cheap. The market's trading on around 8 times PE. And that's why I think that if you continue to see strong earnings growth from the technology companies, if you continue to see companies trying to improve their shareholder returns, given the government's Value Up program, then we do think there can be further upside.
All right, let's talk about Taiwan now. It is heavily concentrated in TSMC. Reports say that it is facing energy strains as advanced chip making and data centers are pretty power intensive. So given the external shocks from the Middle East situation, how resilient do you think is East Asia's AI ecosystem? And where do you think it is actually most exposed?
Well, to date, the likes of TSMC have been quite clear that they do have sufficient power. They said they're working closely with the Taiwanese government, and they think in the short to medium term, that will not be a problem for them. Similarly, in terms of some of the raw materials that they use, like helium, that some people have been raising as a concern because a large proportion does come from the Middle East. Clearly, if the Strait of Hormuz do remain shut for a prolonged period of time, then that will become a bigger issue for East Asia and Asia more broadly. But for now, the companies seem quite confident that they do have the reserves that are required to keep their production going over the next few months. But beyond that, we clearly do need to see the Strait of Hormuz reopening.
All right, so beyond the semiconductor cycle, which you still see upsides, how convincing is the wider growth story for South Korea and for Taiwan? Are they getting support from the broader economy as we speak?
So as we're hearing in lots of different countries at the moment, there is a little bit of a K-shaped economy in both markets. And the parts of the economy that are exposed to the technology sector, workers, as you were just hearing, who are working for Samsung and Hynix, are receiving very strong salaries and bonuses. That part of the economy is doing extremely well. The broader economy outside of technology is not quite so strong in either countries. Demographics are quite weak. They both have very low birth rates. But at the moment, because the technology sector is such a large part of the economy for both Taiwan and Korea, the overall economy are still doing very well in both of these countries.
So at what point does this point to a tech bubble, since it really is significant? Any warning signs that you would watch out for?
We don't see this as a tech bubble, mainly because it's all been driven by earnings so far, and because the valuations are still extremely low, particularly for the memory stocks in Korea, but even some of the highest quality companies in Taiwan, like TSMC, we think they're still trading at reasonable valuations. If you weren't seeing strong earnings growth and you saw extremely high valuations, then that might be a sign of a bubble. But today, we don't see that. We do think this is very different to the tech bubble back in 2000 and 2001, where companies were moving up in terms of their share prices and they had zero earnings. Today, they're extremely profitable, and we do think they're likely to stay profitable and see earnings growth for several years to come. We think 2027 will be a stronger year for earnings than 2026, and we don't think that that will end after 2027. These companies are being asked by their customers to sign long-term agreements to supply their memory semiconductors for up to 5 years. So no, today we are not worried about us being in a bubble.
All right, Sam, thank you so much for your insight. Look forward to continuing our conversation another day. But for now, thank you so much. Sam Conrad there, Asian Equity Income Investment Manager at Jupiter Asset Management. And that's all I have in business, Oteli. Happy Friday to you.
Thanks so very much, Olivia. All right, on that note, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, a volcano eruption in eastern Indonesia leaves 3 hikers dead. A dozen hikers have been rescued, but others are still missing. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Taiwan's parliament has approved a $25 billion defense spending bill after months of political deadlock. But the final package is far smaller than what President William Lai had pushed for, as lawmakers scale back plans to boost the island's military. Now, an oil tanker that cleared the Strait of Hormuz has arrived in South Korea, the first such vessel to reach the country since Iran's blockade. Meanwhile, investigators are examining a blast aboard a Korean-operated vessel near the UAE. And ASEAN leaders race to shore up energy security as Middle East tensions drive up fuel prices. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is pushing faster regional fuel sharing plans, while the bloc also focuses on food security and protecting citizens abroad. Now, just a month ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with the leader of Taiwan's main opposition party, the KMT. CNA looks at whether that summit changed anything for Li-wun and her party and eased simmering tensions across the Taiwan Strait.
An unusual visit took place back in early April. The leader of Taiwan's main opposition party led a 6-day trip to China. Li-wun, the chairwoman of the Kuomintang, or the KMT, had with her a 13-member delegation. They included the Secretary General and party vice chairman. The group paid their respect at the mausoleum of Sun Yat-sen, whom both China and Taiwan regard as the father of modern China. They also visited companies, including Chinese MNC Xiaomi. But the stop that everyone was watching was Ms. Zheng's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And that was what made the visit unusual. Beijing has made it a point not to engage with Taiwan's governing DPP, which has been in power for the past 10 years. It sees the DPP as promoting Taiwan's independence from China. Ms. Zheng's party, the KMT, is relatively friendlier towards Beijing. But it's also been 10 years since the last time the Chinese president and a KMT chair met. So this meeting marked a revival of party-to-party dialogue between the KMT and the Chinese Communist Party. Ms. Zheng had made this a key goal since taking office last November and explained why she considered it significant to reporters after the meeting.
今天的会面，立文觉得具有非常重大的关键意义。我们两岸人民可以相信，只要我们出发点是好的、是对的，两岸的和平发展绝对是充满了乐观、正向发展的可能性。所以今天成功地迈出了这一步。
在他回国之前，抛出会台的10大政策。
Ms. Zheng hailed her trip as a breakthrough for cross-strait peace. After the visit, she was greeted at the airport by 19 lawmakers from her party who voiced full support for her visit. They said the KMT would continue to position itself as a bridge for cross-strait peace and stability. The ruling DPP saw it differently.
国民党的郑丽文主席这一次出访中国，那他定调这场旅程叫做和平之旅。但是我想非常讽刺的是，其实我们国防部也公布，就在这2天，其实在昨天呢，中共方面仍然持续的派遣共机、共舰，以及中共的公务船来侵扰台湾周边的海域。
China did also mention 10 measures for the island, including plans to resume individual travel from Shanghai and Fujian province to Taiwan, along with expanded opportunities for Taiwanese businesses in China. But critics say many of those promises are far from practical, especially under the DPP government's rejection of the One China principle.
内容来讲的话，大概10项惠台措施里，这个10项措施里面，大概有7、8项都是中国的这个单边作为，也就是你要过去到中国大陆，可能享受到农渔产品的优惠，可能享受到影视的这些待遇等等之类的。所以这个超支在即的状况，其实一切都取决于北京的政策。这部分，所以对台湾的民众来讲，这个吸引力跟感受度都感觉上就不如过往。
Public sentiment is divided. A poll showed almost 80% surveyed were aware the meeting took place. 46% said the meeting was successful. 31% said no. 43% said the trip is helpful to cross-strait peace, outnumbering those who see it as not helpful by 4 percentage points. But overall, it was still a minority that replied yes. Similar results in a separate poll. More respondents said the meeting was not helpful in preventing war and maintaining Taiwan's status and overall interests. However, when both surveys asked if renewed dialogue with China is necessary, most said yes, saying it could do more good than harm. That suggests while opinions remain split on Zhen's visit, support for easing cross-strait tensions through talks still exists.
我相信，对于两岸政府重启沟通对话，不管是台湾的民众，或者是台湾的政府，都是有期待的。只是说，这个沟通电话是不是要有前提的沟通对话？所以，如果北京真的理解台湾民意，就会知道说，其实对话是可以不用预设任何前提，而在不预设任何前提的情况之下，其实两边的这种和平跟沟通才能够真正有效的达到。
The summit has reopened dialogue between the leadership of the two parties, but the KMT isn't the party in government, so that may limit the summit's impact on reducing the prospects of war on the island, that some have called the most dangerous place on earth. However, the trip may give Zhen herself a political boost. In a survey conducted over the past 10 years, the Taiwanese public's impression of the Chinese Communist Party has been more negative than positive. Polls this year also show respondents who distrust Zhen exceed those who trust her. But what's noteworthy is that compared with before the trip, her trust rating has gone up by more than 7 percentage points after the trip, the highest it's been since January. Deeper analysis indicating that she's regaining popularity within the KMT base. A major test at home for Ms. Zhen's leadership is coming up in just over 6 months. That's when Taiwan will hold elections for mayor and other local government positions. She might see the fruits of this peace mission then, if the KMT turns in a strong showing, and then further afield, pave her path to the presidential run in 2028.
Britain will be summoning China's ambassador after a London court convicted 2 men of spying for Beijing on Hong Kong dissidents living in the UK. Prosecutors say the pair conducted covert surveillance on pro-democracy activists, a case China calls a political attack. Bill Yuan and Peter Wai have been accused of conducting covert surveillance operations targeting pro-democracy activists living in Britain, including former Hong Kong lawmaker Nathan Law. The court heard the pair gathered information on activists' movements, contacts and communications on behalf of Hong Kong authorities in Beijing. China's embassy condemned the case as a political move, while Britain says it reflects growing concerns over Chinese espionage in the UK. Both men face up to 14 years in prison. Now, other news on our radar. The death toll from a firework factory explosion in China has risen to 37 from 26 people. 1 person remains missing, and more than 50 others are being treated in hospitals. It's the country's deadliest blast since 2019. The incident took place on Monday in Hunan's Liuyang County, an area widely known as the fireworks capital of the world. Now, China's top prosecutors are overseeing a probe into the explosion. Hunan province officials have suspended operations of all fireworks plants in the city for inspections. The accident comes as fireworks factories are in their peak production season for overseas orders, including those for America's 250th anniversary on the 4th of July. Japanese authorities have confirmed the country's first fatal bear attack of the year. An Environment Ministry official says a 55-year-old woman died last month in Iwate Prefecture in northern Japan. Police are also investigating 2 other possible bear-related deaths. 1 body was also found in Iwate yesterday, and another in neighboring Yamagata earlier this week. Authorities say details are still being verified. It follows a spate of deadly encounters last year when a record 13 people were killed in bear attacks across Japan. Indonesian authorities are rushing to rescue hikers who are trapped after Mount Dukono erupted. Local authorities say 3 people have died. 2 are Singaporeans and 1 is an Indonesian. At least a dozen people have been rescued. Now, Mount Dukono, which is located in the North Maluku province, erupted this morning and sent volcanic ash as high as 10 kilometers into the sky. CNA's Chatni Vatvani with the details.
A statement from Ternate's search and rescue chief said that the hiking group consisted of 9 Singaporeans and 11 local residents of North Maluku province. North Halmahéra's police chief said that aside from the 2 Singaporeans who died, the remaining 7 foreigners had safely descended from the mountain. The head of Indonesia's geological agency said the eruption, which occurred in the early hours of Friday morning, was accompanied by a loud boom and a thick column of smoke that rose about 10 kilometers. The mountain's alert status has been maintained at the 3rd highest level, and the agency has advised local residents, visitors and hikers not to carry out activities within a 4-kilometer radius of the crater. It's also warned of the risk of volcanic mudflows in the event of rain. The provincial police chief also said that climbing Mount Dukono had been banned since an earlier eruption in 2024. Evacuation efforts are ongoing, with more than 30 personnel from the North Halmahera Police, the military, the Regional Disaster Agency and Search and Rescue Agency on site. Chandni Vatvani, CNA, Jakarta.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, electric vehicles are powering the global shift to cleaner transport. But the real control may lie beyond the mines. It's in how lithium is refined for batteries. Our digital correspondent breaks down China's role in that process. Electric vehicles are seen as the future of cleaner transport, and car makers around the world are racing to keep up with the demand. But the battle is no longer just about building better cars. It's also about who controls the materials that power them, especially batteries. Now, a key ingredient is lithium, used in almost all EV batteries. But analysts say the real leverage is not in mining, but refining. China is a dominant player in this field. And experts are saying its refining hubs account for some 60 to 70% of global lithium chemical processing. Well, that control is crucial, as refining is usually where costs are set and supply reliability is determined. And for more insights on why that dominance matters, we're joined by CNA digital correspondent Melody Chan, live from Shenzhen. Melody, so your story basically highlights that China's edge is not just in mining, but why is the middle step of refining the materials so important?
Right, thanks for having me. So when we talk about lithium, a lot of people think about mining, but actually mining is only step 1. So whatever comes out of the ground, be it brine or rock, it is still raw. It cannot power a car yet. So it needs to be processed into what is called the battery-grade lithium materials. And that step will determine 3 key things: how long the battery lasts, how stable it is, and how much it costs. And this is where China is coming in. And this is very relevant to consumers as well. The key point is lithium is mined all around the world, mainly in places like Australia or Africa. Australia alone produces about 30% of it. But when we talk about refining, China accounts for about 60 to 70%. We are seeing this in practice. A lot of foreign companies are setting up production within China in order to stay close to this ecosystem. And therefore, a lot of analysts are saying that the control is not in the mines, but in this middle step.
And of course, Melody, you've got US and Europe, doing all they can to build enough refining capacity to cut their dependence on China. But how challenging is it for them?
Well, it's harder than it sounds, because refining lithium is not just about building factories. It's very technically complex, it's hard to scale, and it's also energy intensive. So inside China, it's part of this larger ecosystem, from refining to battery chemicals to battery manufacturing. And that integration matters because China is also the world's largest EV battery manufacturer. It accounted for more than 80% of lithium-ion battery in 2024. And so once lithium is refined, it can be put into battery manufacturing very quickly at scale. Now, the US and Europe, they are trying to catch up using subsidies, policy support, or building new projects. But many of these new projects are still in the early stages. They are not really running at full scale, and some of it are trying to match the strict quality standard for EV batteries. So the reality is this transition will still take time, and we are talking years, not months, for us to see any meaningful shift.
Okay, so China's ahead in the game. We can see that China's got a good grip on the sector, but are there any factors that could perhaps affect their dominance?
Right. So for now, for the short term, China's grip seems to be still strong because it controls many parts of the supply chain, not just one. But there are a few things to watch. First of all, is that other countries are building alternative supply chains. Like the US and Europe, they are pouring in billions into building battery plants, refining projects. But in order for a full supply chain to be built, it takes some time. And secondly, the market itself is volatile. We've seen lithium prices fluctuate in recent years. In the past 2 years, it has fallen steeply, and recently it's climbing again amid rising demand and supply concerns. And that kind of volatility can delay projects and also slow down investment. And thirdly is technology. So currently, many of these battery designs still rely on lithium. So we are going to still see that being centric for the time being. But a lot of battery makers, they are also investing into alternatives, for example, sodium-ion batteries. So the key to see whether China's grip is going to still stay strong would be whether other countries can come up with alternatives or whether they will be able to do it quickly enough.
Oh, certainly be keeping a close eye on that space. Thanks so very much. CNA's digital correspondent Melody Chan reporting to us live from Shenzhen. And of course, you can read more about Melody Chan's look into China's grip on battery-grade lithium and other hidden costs of electric vehicles across Asia on our website, cna.asia, or on our mobile app. Our Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has announced an expedited ratification of a regional fuel-sharing deal among a series of outcomes aimed at crisis management. Now, at the press conference for the 48th ASEAN Leaders Summit in Cebu, he laid out 3 urgent priorities: energy resilience, food security, as well as the safety of ASEAN nationals abroad. Well, this is the first of the 2 summits that the Philippines will be hosting this year as the bloc's chair. And discussion through the day also focused on exchanging views on the bloc's capacity to address global uncertainties.
This morning, we had a candid and productive exchange on the challenges before us. We spoke extensively about the importance of ensuring regional energy security and resilience, stabilizing food security in the face of external shocks, and regarding the safety and welfare of our nationals that we need to safeguard, some of whom live and work far from home.
All right, for more insights, we've got CNA's senior correspondent Liang Waikit. He is reporting to us live at the summit in Cebu, Philippines. Waikit, we know that ASEAN leaders, they held this closed-door meeting earlier today. Give us more details on that.
Right, Oteli, the press conference you mentioned that Mr. Marcos held, well, I just stepped out of it not too long ago, and 2 key things stand out for me. He talked about energy security and a new ASEAN Maritime Center. Let's start with energy security. During the question and answer session, Mr. Marcos was grilled by various reporters who wanted to reconcile the urgency of the energy security situation with the speed of ratification of this APSA deal, which is basically a mutual petrol sharing deal among bloc members. Mr. Marcos replied that the energy ministers have yet to meet and therefore there's no timetable or timeline set, but he understands the urgency of the situation and that he says this ratification, operationalization of this APSA will be made as soon as possible. As for the ASEAN Maritime Center, Mr. Marcos stressed that right now, ASEAN has agreed in principle for the setting up of this center to be in the Philippines. And next would be questions such as who funds it, how the structure looks like, who's going to be involved. But he also emphasized that this maritime center is not designed to confront or push back any single force or country, but really to ensure that there's peaceful and freedom of navigation on the South China Sea.
And Waikid, I know a lot came out of the ASEAN summit, but walk us through what really stood out for you on the second day of this summit.
Myanmar, because for the last 2 days, the focus was really on the Middle East crisis fallout. But Mr. Marcos revealed that a large topic at the retreat summit among the leaders was Myanmar, and he described the atmosphere as vibrant and to a certain extent emotional. At the media conference, many journalists also asked him about Myanmar. I asked him about Myanmar. I asked Mr. Marcos what was Myanmar's response to ASEAN's request for the special envoy to meet Aung San Suu Kyi, and he said, we have not moved on that. He said that this is one of the main negotiating points that ASEAN has with the Myanmar-lying administration, and that Aung San Suu Kyi be freed, and that for her to allow her to exercise her rights.
I appreciate that report. CNA's Leong Wai Kit speaking to us live at the summit in Cebu, Philippines. Now, Paraguay's President Santiago Peña has reaffirmed support for Taiwan, a day after China urged the South American nation to sever diplomatic ties with Taipei. Well, Mr. Peña says that Paraguay deeply values its relationship with Taiwan at a welcome ceremony with Taiwanese President William Lai. He's in Taiwan on a 4-day trip, and he added that Paraguay will continue backing what he describes as a strategic alliance rooted in democracy, freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. Well, Mr. Lai, meantime, thanked Paraguay for what he called its long-standing support in the international arena. He says Mr. Peña's visit would deepen friendship and bring cooperation even closer. Paraguay is Taipei's last diplomatic partner in South America. It's among a dozen governments that maintain formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Now, China, which claims Taiwan as its own territory, has been ramping up pressure on the island's remaining allies to switch recognition from Taipei to Beijing. And that's all we've got for you for Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. I hope you've enjoyed that. Don't forget, if you want some headlines, you can always go to cna.asia anytime. And we're also on all the socials, so we're on Facebook and YouTube. Well, thanks so very much for your company this Friday evening. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday.